Coca Cola was poured on a black woman while working, but when her husband arrived, everyone got fired. They poured soda on her like she didn't matter. They laughed. They filmed. But Maya Brooks wasn't just another analyst. It started on a quiet Friday morning at Stratiform Analytics in downtown Denver. The sun filtered softly through the 42nd floor windows, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floor. Most of the team had clocked out early for the long Labor Day weekend, but Maya Brooks stayed behind, by choice. Her investor deck wasn't just another task. It was a shot at proving herself. A 37-slide projection of market trends, custom-coded risk matrices, and predictive insights she'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. At 29, Maya was the youngest data strategist in the company and the only black woman in her division. She wasn't flashy. She didn't gossip in the break room. She stayed late, worked hard, and spoke only when necessary. Her silence made her an easy target for people who mistook humility for weakness. That's when Marissa Langston walked in. Marissa had been there for years, senior brand lead, daughter of a local senator, and queen bee of Stratiform's unspoken social hierarchy. She held a chilled soda in one hand, walking slowly toward the conference table where Maya was arranging her charts. There was a look in Marissa's eyes. Not mischief, not humor, but something colder. With calculated precision, she cracked the can open and tilted it forward, straight onto Maya's blouse. The hiss of carbonation and the splash of dark syrup echoed louder than it should have in the near-empty office. The liquid ran down Maya's torso, soaking the front of her shirt and pooling over her printed spreadsheets. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, laughter. Marissa gave a mock gasp. "Oops," she smirked. "Didn't see you there. Maybe your presentation needed a little fizz." Behind her, Evan Pierce, the smug account coordinator with more ambition than talent, lifted his phone and hit record. "Friday fizz for the Inclusion Initiative," he said, laughing. "HR hires based on color, not content." Tessa Lynn, the HR assistant whose job it was to enforce respect, giggled as she texted. "Inclusion failure," she muttered. "This is gold." Maya said nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. The soda clung to her skin like armor. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for a napkin, but only for a second. Then they steadied. She looked around the room. Through the glass walls, a few remaining employees paused to glance, then turned away. One adjusted his headphones. Another scrolled through Slack. No one stepped in. Maya stood perfectly straight. She met Marissa's eyes, then Evan's, then Tessa's. Without blinking, she pulled out her phone and typed a single line of text. "You just made the smartest mistake of your lives," she said quietly. They roared with laughter. "Gonna call your ride?" Evan mocked. "Tell him to bring a mop?" "Maybe her boyfriend works at the Pepsi plant," Marissa chimed in, biting down a grin. "I heard she still lives in the East End," Tessa whispered, loud enough to be heard. "Honestly, I'm surprised she even owns that blouse." Still, Maya didn't react. She tapped her phone, locked it, and waited. Exactly 10 minutes later, the private executive elevator lit up. Nobody noticed at first. They were too busy refreshing Instagram and rewatching Evan's video. But when the soft ding rang out and the elevator doors slid open, everything changed. 3 men in dark uniforms stepped out first, private security. Not the building's guards. These were tailored, earpiece-wearing professionals. Behind them, a tall man in a sleek Tom Ford suit entered, walking like he'd already been briefed on every person in the room. Julian Devereux. His reputation preceded him. Quiet titan of tech. Angel investor. Founder of the quantum logistics firm DevCore. Worth nearly $9.3 billion. The kind of man who didn't just own companies. He saved or sank them with a single email. He walked directly to Maya. "Maya," he said, his voice calm, deep, and even. "Are you all right?" She nodded slowly. "I'm fine now." Julian turned. He scanned the room. Evan stepped back. Tessa dropped her phone. Marissa's face had gone pale. Julian said nothing. He didn't ask for explanations. He didn't raise his voice. All he did was speak into his watch and say, "Activate the list." Within minutes, 3 termination notices were printed and delivered. Email access revoked. Security badges deactivated. HR was alerted, not the Tessa kind, but corporate legal. Marissa sputtered. "You can't just." "You don't speak right now," Julian said coolly. "Your privileges here expired the moment you assaulted a team member. You're overreacting. She's my wife." The silence that followed was total and suffocating. Evan tried to speak, but the security guards were already leading him out. Tessa opened her mouth, then closed it again. Julian didn't stay long. He took Maya's hand and led her out, soda-stained shirt and all. By that evening, the incident was under review. The video had gone viral internally, but Stratiform's board didn't just panic, they panicked fast. Press releases were drafted, apologies issued, but none of it mattered. Not to Maya. Because while they scrambled to do damage control, Maya was already thinking bigger. She hadn't just survived humiliation. She had documented it. And now, she would use it. They thought she was a quiet analyst in a cubicle. What they didn't know was she was a systems thinker with vision, resources, and connections. Because what they poured on her that day wasn't just soda. It was fuel. And the spark had already been lit. The house was silent. Not the kind of silence that follows rage, but the kind that precedes resolve. Out in the garden behind their estate, quiet, lush, shaded by soft swaying birches, Maya Brooks sat with a steaming cup of tea resting on her knee and a digital notebook opened in her lap. The gentle hum of cicadas filled the air, blending with the faint chirps from the smart security system nestled in the hedges. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger was a spark. It burned hot, then vanished. Maya didn't need heat. She needed structure. Intention. Cold precision. The morning sunlight filtered through the trellis, scattering lace-like shadows across the stone tiles. She sat still, absorbing the stillness like oxygen, letting her mind wander, not into pain, but into possibility. It would have been so easy to react, to lash out, to watch them grovel. But Maya wasn't built like that. She never had been. Even in college, surrounded by students who questioned her presence, professors who mistook her for the assistant, recruiters who said she was impressive for her background, she had never exploded. She absorbed, she documented, and she built. Now, she was building again. She tapped the tablet once, and a digital dashboard opened. Encrypted, time-stamped, and meticulously organized. There it was, her archive. Months of evidence. Screenshots of Slack conversations where her ideas were dismissed and later regurgitated by others. Video clips from boardroom meetings where colleagues talked over her, cut her off, or claimed credit. Private emails forwarded by an ally in IT. Emails that reduced her to a checkbox. "We need a black female analyst for optics," one of them read. She remembered the day she read that one. It didn't sting anymore. It just confirmed what she already knew. Everything was documented. Not out of spite, but because she had learned long ago, systems only change when you show them their own reflection. Across the yard, the kitchen lights flicked on behind the glass. Julian, still in his morning robe, was pouring coffee. He caught her eye through the window, smiled gently, and raised his mug in salute. She smiled back, but her fingers never stopped typing. Julian Devereux wasn't just her husband. He was her ally, her amplifier. While others saw her as a quiet analyst, Julian knew she was an architect. Of code, of ideas, of movements. He had given her a question that had lived in her head since the elevator doors closed behind them the day before. What if they hadn't poured that soda? It haunted her, not because she wanted it erased, but because it clarified everything. Stratiform had buried her algorithm 6 months earlier. Too complex for commercial use, they said. In truth, it had threatened the firm's outdated model. Her system had one fatal flaw in their eyes. It worked too well. It detected hidden bias in data infrastructure, hiring pipelines, client segmentation, even marketing language. It revealed inequity not as an accusation, but as raw fact. They shelved it. Maya let them. But not anymore. On her screen, she pulled up the file, our 3-Veal Bias Recognition Engine, version 2.3. She smiled. The algorithm pulsed like a heartbeat on the screen, its rows of intelligent code humming quietly. Not a weapon, but a lens. A tool to expose how institutions functioned, not to destroy them, but to push them toward accountability, to help them do better. That was always the mission. But now, she controlled the mission. Maya tapped a second icon. A new project file opened, Lumina. It was no longer just a dream. Lumina would be the platform that carried our 3-Veal into the world. Not through white papers or watered-down workshops, but through partnerships, scholarships, and data tools that reshaped how businesses hired, promoted, and represented. It would begin with funding from Julian, but it wouldn't end there. Maya envisioned something scalable, impactful. Her dream wasn't just to get a seat at the table, she wanted to build new tables. Tables where others like her never had to shrink themselves, where diversity, wasn't a branding line but a measurable function of ethical design. She heard the soft creak of the garden door. Julian stepped outside, barefoot on the stone path, holding 2 mugs. He handed her one and sat beside her, not speaking yet. He looked at the screen, saw the code. "So," he said quietly, "you're doing it." "I'm not going to spend the next year fighting a lawsuit," she said. "I'm going to spend the next 10 changing the industry." Julian nodded, watching her work. "That's why they'll never see it coming." Maya sipped her coffee. "It won't be about me." "I know," Julian said. "That's what makes it powerful." They sat there for a while, not needing to speak. The stillness wasn't empty. It was the pressure before a wave. Maya thought about the interns she once mentored, the young black women who'd come to her in private and whispered, "How do you stay here?" She thought about the panels she'd spoken on, where executives nodded along and then forgot everything the moment the lights went out. She thought about all the young minds who had brilliance but no map. She was going to build the map. This wasn't about revenge. That was too small. This was about architecture, about reprogramming an industry from the inside out. At that moment, a soft breeze moved through the trees. Maya looked up at the sky, closed her laptop, and leaned back in her chair. The storm had passed, but the blueprint was only just beginning. The headline dropped like a thunderclap across the digital skyline. Top executives fired in discrimination scandal at Stratiform Analytics. Within minutes, it was on every business news ticker. By noon, the story had gone global. At first, the firm tried to control the narrative. A carefully worded press release was sent out, calling it an internal personnel adjustment. But the internet doesn't wait. And Maya Brooks had already made her move. Through her attorney, she released a sealed package of documentation, precise, time-stamped, undeniable. It wasn't just her word against theirs. It was records, emails, footage, Slack transcripts, a full timeline of casual cruelty and institutional decay built meticulously over months. What emerged was more than a story of spilled soda and office bullying. It was a blueprint of systemic rot. Buried in the files were messages between executives, mocking DI efforts and celebrating cleaning house quietly. There were emails ranking optics over competence. HR documents marked with invisible ink patterns of dismissals, sudden reassignments, silencing payoffs. And worst of all, she wasn't the first. Within hours of the story breaking, former employees began to speak up. Quietly at first, then louder. A ripple became a wave. Anonymous testimonies flooded social media. "I was passed over for promotion 3 times despite outperforming my team. They told me I was too intense for the brand image. I trained someone who became my boss." Maya's evidence had cracked open the silence. Stratiform Analytics tried to downplay it. They failed. The company's name trended for the wrong reasons. #Stratiform scandal surged on Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit. Influential thought leaders in the tech world weighed in. A well-known CEO tweeted, "It's not just one company. It's the culture." Then came the investors. Within 48 hours, Stratiform's stock dipped 17%. 2 major clients publicly announced a pause in their contracts. Another threatened to sue for reputational damage. Internal Slack messages, leaked anonymously, showed chaos behind the scenes. Directors resigned. Legal teams panicked. The board called emergency sessions. Meanwhile, Maya never said a word publicly. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. She let the truth speak. She let the data breathe. Behind the scenes, she and Julian worked with legal counsel to craft a settlement, not just for damages, but for accountability. Julian didn't want money. Maya didn't want revenge. They wanted leverage. The final agreement, reached in arbitration, was seismic. The 3 executives directly involved were permanently terminated, banned from future board positions for 5 years, and required to surrender all vested stock options, millions of dollars worth. Those shares, redirected under a negotiated clause, were placed into a private equity account. But Maya had no intention of cashing out. Instead, she looked at Julian and simply said, "Let's use it." And they did. Together, Maya and Julian formed the Luminous Seed Fund, quietly launched just 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized. Its mission? To empower underrepresented youth in data science, machine learning, and ethical tech. The fund began with $9.8 million. Money sourced directly from the pockets of the very people who had tried to humiliate her. Julian offered to double it. Maya declined. "I don't want it to look like your cause," she said. "This has to be rooted in what they took from others." And she meant it. Every dollar that went into the Lumina Seed Fund came with a story, a cost, and a purpose. The initiative wasn't just financial, it was architectural. Maya worked with advisors to design internship pipelines, fund research grants for HBCU students, and support high school coding boot camps in underserved areas. She reached out to professors she once admired, connected with nonprofit tech labs she had donated to quietly for years. The press tried to catch her for a statement. She declined interviews. She turned down speaking engagements. All she did was post one thing to her LinkedIn account. A system can only pretend until someone measures it. Then it either reforms or it crumbles. I've seen both. Now, I'm building something new. The post went viral. Even now, inside Stratiform's walls, morale had cratered. The remaining leadership scrambled to rewrite their public commitments to equity. But the damage had already been done. Maya hadn't just taken them down. She'd taken their excuses with her. And yet, she still carried herself with grace. When a journalist asked Maya's attorney if she intended to destroy the company, the response was simple. No. She exposed it. Destruction was already happening. She just turned on the lights. Inside their estate, Maya worked quietly night after night, mapping partnerships, reviewing proposals, fine-tuning the Lumina platform. There were moments when Julian would peek into her study and find her surrounded by handwritten notes, algorithms pulled up on 3 monitors, and grand applications stacked like bricks. "You're rebuilding," he'd whisper. "No," she'd say with a small smile, "I'm replanting." Because Maya didn't want to tear down an empire. She wanted to raise a forest. And now, she had the means to water it. The people who had laughed at her never expected her to make noise. But Maya Brooks didn't make noise. She made systems. And those systems, funded by the fallout, would outlast headlines. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. At East Denver University, a campus long known for engineering excellence but rarely for equity, the seats were filled, not just with students and professors, but with local leaders, journalists, and CEOs. The stage was minimal. Just a dark oak podium, a university seal, and a blue banner stretched behind it. It read, simply, the Brooks Fellowship, Technology, Equity, Future. Cameras lined the back of the room. Microphones stood like sentinels. But the real electricity came from the whispers in the crowd. Is she really here? Do you think she'll talk about Stratiform? She changed everything overnight. And then, the doors opened. Maya Brooks stepped in. She wore a navy pantsuit, sharp, modern, understated. No glitz. No dramatics. Just presence. Confidence. Precision. Behind her walked Julian Devereux, dressed in black and holding a slim briefcase, his expression unreadable. He took a front-row seat while Maya moved toward the stage alone. No introduction needed. No applause requested. The moment she reached the microphone, the room stilled. Maya looked out across the crowd, students wide-eyed with curiosity, faculty standing with respect, reporters poised with pens, and took a quiet breath. 6 months ago, she began, I was humiliated in a corporate office because I didn't look like I belonged. The silence deepened. She paused. I stood there, drenched in soda, ridiculed by colleagues, and recorded for fun. But what they didn't realize, what they never bothered to learn, was that I wasn't there to belong. I was there to build. She lifted a hand and gestured toward the banner behind her. And today, she said, we're building something far more powerful than one career or one company. We're launching a movement. The Brooks Fellowship. The words now carried weight. Maya's voice was calm but certain. Not a speech, it was a declaration. This fellowship, she continued, is for every student who's been told to wait their turn, to speak more softly, to shrink to fit into rooms that were never designed for them. She leaned forward slightly. We don't just belong in the room, she said, voice rising. We belong at the table. A ripple moved through the crowd, first a soft murmur, then applause, then rising cheers. But Maya wasn't done. The Brooks Fellowship will provide full scholarships, mentorships, and paid internships to Black and underrepresented students in the fields of data science, machine learning, and ethical AI, she explained. It is fully funded by the settlement reached after the Stratiform Analytics scandal and by the licensing of my original algorithm, R3VL, which has now been adopted by 3 Fortune 100 firms. The screens behind her lit up with a looping video, students in labs, coding sessions, professors guiding workshops. Under each clip, 3 words glowed in white: learn, build, lead. Each fellow will not only receive financial support, Maya said. but they'll be paired with working professionals in their fields, taught how to navigate systems with confidence, and equipped with tools I never had when I started. She paused again, then added with emphasis, no student will have to choose between survival and success. From the front row, Julian watched her with pride, but also with awe. This wasn't just the woman who had rebuilt herself after being broken down. This was a leader now building bridges for others to cross. Behind the scenes, a team of coordinators began organizing the application portal. Partner companies had already signed on to hire fellows after graduation. Alumni of color from across the country had agreed to serve as volunteer mentors. A full ecosystem was forming. And Maya was the center of its gravity. One student in the crowd, a freshman named Alina Jones, clutched her notebook tightly. She had entered college unsure of where she belonged. But in that moment, as she watched Maya command a stage with grace and purpose, something clicked. That could be me. That will be me. Maya continued, now speaking directly to students. I know what it feels like to question your value, she said. To enter a space and feel like you need to shrink to be accepted. But here's the truth. Shrinking serves no one, least of all the world, which needs your full brilliance. She pointed to the front row. And we're not waiting for permission anymore. The applause was louder now, rising like a storm. Photographers captured the moment as Maya stepped back from the podium. A few tears were visible in the crowd, not from sadness, but recognition, gratitude. She returned to her seat beside Julian. He leaned over and whispered something only she could hear. You just changed the equation. She nodded. I steady. Now we scale. By the end of that day, the story had broken nationally. Maya Brooks launches fellowship after landmark tech discrimination case. Quiet analyst to industry icon, the woman behind the code. Julian Devereux backs equity initiative with $10 million seed round. But Maya didn't need headlines. The real reward came in the emails that followed, from a single mom in Baltimore whose daughter dreamed of MIT. From a student in Compton building his own neural net from scratch. From a teenager in Lagos who'd read her story and asked, how do I begin? Each message was a spark, and Maya had every intention of lighting the way. Because this wasn't just about repairing what had been broken. It was about building something unshakable. The Brooks Fellowship wasn't charity. It was infrastructure, a pipeline for potential, a platform for power. And it had only just begun. They never saw her coming. Not because she crept through the shadows or struck with fury, but because she didn't raise her voice. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. Maya Brooks believed in data. And data, unlike people, didn't lie. Months after the scandal at Stratiform Analytics erupted across media channels, the company had tried to rebrand. A new logo, a new values page on their website. Photos of smiling interns posted weekly. But the damage wasn't just reputational, it was structural. Their diversity metrics tanked. Their recruiting pipeline dried up. No one wanted to intern for a company whose name was synonymous with corporate humiliation. Clients backed out quietly. Journalists kept digging. And the three executives at the center of the firestorm? Their careers were in freefall, their LinkedIn pages eerily silent. Meanwhile, Maya Brooks built. Not with headlines, not with vengeance, but with vision. Her startup, Lumina Logic, launched quietly out of a modest satellite office in Boulder. No splashy press release, no glitzy PR campaign, just a few desks, a team of idealists, and the framework of a system that would change everything. At its core was our 3VL, the algorithm that Stratiform once shelved. Now refined, tested, and open-sourced through carefully vetted partners, our 3VL could scan an organization's data infrastructure and surface patterns no one wanted to see. Biased hiring pathways, pay inequities, performance rating disparities. But it didn't stop at exposure. It offered actionable corrections, solutions embedded in code. While Stratiform was issuing statements, Lumina Logic was issuing contracts. Maya's first clients were community colleges. Not glamorous, but intentional. Then came city governments. Then a coalition of historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs. Within months, Lumina was being quietly adopted by education boards and nonprofit think tanks. Not because it was flashy, but because it worked. And then, in a twist so rich with irony it barely needed commentary, the emails started rolling in. From corporations that had once ignored her resume. From companies whose recruiters had overlooked her at conferences. From firms that once scoffed at the ethics conversation in tech. They wanted to license her 3VL. Some sent inquiries through official channels. Others tried the back door, friends of friends, cold calls, even gifts. But Maya's response never changed. We are not accepting private enterprise licenses at this time. She didn't shame them, didn't publish receipts. She didn't even forward the emails. She simply moved forward. Because to Maya, redemption didn't look like retaliation. It looked like impact. On a quiet Tuesday morning, she sat in the corner of Lumina's Denver office, sipping jasmine tea and reading the week's onboarding reports. For new university partners, 6 community grants approved, 2 fellowship alumni hired into full-time positions. She smiled. Her success wasn't loud. It didn't trend. But it rippled in classrooms, in boardrooms, in hiring decisions no one would ever trace back to her. Julian stepped into the room holding a tablet. "You're not going to believe this," he said. She looked up. "Try me." Stratiform wants to acquire licensing through a third-party shelf firm. Their legal watermark was still embedded in the metadata. Maya didn't even blink. "Red flag the IP," she said calmly. "Decline the request." Quietly. Julian grinned. "Still don't want to call them out?" She shook her head. "They'll fade themselves. I don't need to dim them. I just need to keep shining." It was Maya's way. No quotes to the press. No exposés. She gave them silence, the most powerful statement of all. Because the real revenge was never revenge. It was irrelevance. Stratiform kept sinking. A leaked investor memo showed plummeting Q2 numbers and stalled recruitment efforts. Behind closed doors, consultants whispered that the company had become radioactive. But Maya didn't cheer. She didn't gloat. She didn't even look back. Her energy stayed forward. One of Lumina's most ambitious partnerships emerged with the Department of Education. A multi-year initiative that would integrate R3VL into public school hiring models, ensuring equity in educator evaluations across 5 major states. The project alone was worth $22 million. But to Maya, the value wasn't in the contract. It was in the letters. Emails from teachers in rural districts who finally saw fair pay. Notes from students whose counselors looked like them for the first time. Testimonials from fellows who felt seen, heard, and supported. That was the data that mattered. One evening, long after the office lights dimmed and the city had gone quiet, Maya stood at the window of her home office. The skyline twinkled in the distance. Somewhere in that glitter, Stratiform still existed, probably still spinning its narrative. But Maya didn't even think of them now. She thought about the interns starting tomorrow. The girl from Atlanta who coded her own scholarship tracker. The young man from Detroit who'd built an AI to detect hate speech in gaming communities. The single mother in Texas who was teaching herself Python at night. She thought about them and smiled, because in the end, they were the victory. Not the silence, not the fall of Stratiform, but the rise of something better. The gymnasium smelled faintly of new paint and fresh paper. Folded chairs lined the stage, each one occupied by a young scholar in a crisp, navy blue stole bearing the gold-stitched initials, BF, the Brooks Fellowship. It was graduation day at Eastwood Tech Academy, a community-centered school nestled in one of Denver's most overlooked neighborhoods. Today, it wasn't being overlooked. It was alive. Parents, mentors, educators, and local leaders filled the room. Balloons floated beside hand-painted signs. Phones were held up, ready to capture a moment. And at the center of it all sat Maya Brooks, her hands folded quietly in her lap, eyes glistening before the first name was even called. She'd arrived early, wanted to walk the halls before anyone else. The floors were different now, waxed and bright, but the bones of the place were the same. It was here, just blocks from where she grew up, that Maya first learned how to code, where she borrowed a second-hand laptop from the library cart and spent nights teaching herself to debug. Now she was back, not as a student, not as a survivor, but as a builder. The ceremony began. Names were called. Hands were shaken. Cheers echoed. Each graduate's story had its own rhythm. Some were heading to Ivy League campuses, others to startups, nonprofits, apprenticeships. What they shared was foundation, support, opportunity. Maya didn't hear every word of the speeches. She was watching the faces that once might have been passed over, faces that now radiated purpose. Then came the final student. Her name echoed across the microphone, Ariel Mendez. A petite girl in oversized glasses stepped forward, her smile wide, nervous energy trailing behind her. She accepted her certificate, shook the dean's hand, and then her eyes scanned the room. She spotted Maya. Without hesitation, Ariel darted off stage, breaking formation, crossing the room in swift strides until she reached her. And then, she hugged her. Tightly. Maya's breath caught. "Because of you," Ariel whispered. "I know I can do this." Maya froze, not out of discomfort, but awe. That quiet kind of awe that humbles you down to the bone. Tears welled in her eyes as she returned the embrace, her voice soft against the roar of clapping behind them. "You already did." Ariel smiled, wiped her eyes, and rejoined the graduates. "And Maya?" Maya sat motionless for a moment, overcome. She looked up, toward the back of the gym, and found Julian standing there, just inside the double doors. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He just stood quietly, hands in his pockets, watching her with the kind of pride that didn't need words. She gave a small nod. He returned it. The moment stretched, simple, perfect. The gym buzzed back to life as students gathered for photos. Certificates waved in the air. Music swelled. But Maya wasn't focused on the noise. She was thinking of where this all began. Of the soda that drenched her in that glass boardroom. Of the silence that followed. Of the fire that came next, not burning, but refining. She never wanted a headline. She wanted impact. And now, it stood before her, dozens of futures shaped by a decision to build instead of break. A soft piano melody began to play through the gym speakers. Unscripted, someone had cued a tribute video. On screen, images flickered. The first day of the fellowship, Maya speaking at orientation, students at whiteboards building prototypes, field trips to tech labs, late nights in classrooms, faces aglow with laptop light. And then, her voice, recorded during the founding announcement, rang out. "We don't just belong in the room. We belong at the table. And soon, we'll be building the tables ourselves." The camera slowly panned out, catching one last image. Maya, still seated, surrounded by students as the room celebrated. And in the distance, the man who stood by her through the fire, watching, proud, still. A voiceover rolled in, gentle and steady. From injustice to innovation, Maya Brooks didn't just rise. She changed the future. And then, fade to black. If you enjoyed the story of Maya Brooks, Julian Devereux, and the rise of Lumina Logic, please like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about how Maya's journey unfolded and how it all ended? Drop a comment with your honest rating on a scale of 1 to 10, and let us know where you're watching from. Do you believe justice was truly served? Was the ending satisfying? Your feedback helps us keep telling stories that matter. Join the conversation and be part of the movement for impact-driven storytelling.